Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Before I begin my story today, I'd love to know where you're all listening from, so please drop a comment down below. You know, it's a funny thing about life, how quickly the people you've poured your entire existence into can turn around and make you feel like an inconvenience. A piece of old furniture they are just waiting to discard. My son, Mark, the boy I'd have plucked the stars from the sky for, brought a woman into our lives, into my home, who looked me in the eye and said, "There's only room for one woman in this family." The audacity still makes my blood simmer, even now. But the thing is, she was right. She just never imagined she wouldn't be that woman. This is the story of how a woman they thought was past her prime and easily manipulated, showed them exactly who was staying and who was going. And believe me, it wasn't me packing my bags. My life hadn't always been a battleground. For many years, it was a sanctuary, a warm haven built on love and shared dreams with my late husband, Arthur. We'd poured our youth, our savings, and our sweat into our home, a lovely two-story house with a sprawling garden that Arthur tended with such care. Every brick, every rose bush, held a memory. After Arthur passed, the house became my solace, filled with echoes of his laughter and the comfortable routines we'd established. Mark, our only child, was the center of my universe. I'd sacrificed a lot for him, my own career aspirations, countless sleepless nights, and a significant portion of the inheritance Arthur left me, all to ensure he had the best education, the best start in life. I never begrudged him any of it. That's what a mother does. Or so I believed. When Mark announced he was getting married to Tiffany, a woman he'd known for barely 6 months, I tried to be optimistic. I plastered a smile on my face and welcomed her with open arms, hoping she would be the daughter I never had. Tiffany was striking. Polished, modern, with a smile that rarely reached her eyes. In those early days, I dismissed my unease as a mother's natural apprehension. I told myself I needed to give her a chance, to see her through Mark's eyes. She and Mark had decided, with very little input from me, that they would move into my house. "It's so big for just you, Mom," Mark had said, "and it'll help us save for our own place eventually." I agreed, thinking it would be nice to have life and laughter in the house again, to not be so alone. The first signs were subtle, like little pebbles dropped into a calm pond, sending out ripples of discomfort. Tiffany would make small, almost imperceptible changes. A vase Arthur had loved moved from its prominent place in the living room to a dusty shelf in the study. My comfortable old armchair, suddenly draped with a modern, scratchy throw that wasn't to my taste. She'd comment on my cooking. "Oh, Eleanor, that's a very traditional way of making lasagna," with a slight curl of her lip. Mark, besotted, noticed nothing, or if he did, he'd just chuckle and say, "Tiffany's got great taste, Mom. She's just trying to freshen things up." It felt more like she was trying to erase me, to paint over the life Arthur and I had built with her own garish colors. I'd find her wandering through my bedroom, my private space, picking up my belongings, her eyes cataloging everything with an unnerving intensity. When I'd gently question her, she'd feign innocence. "Oh, I was just admiring your things, Eleanor." Such antiques. The way she said antiques made it sound like relics. The garden Arthur loved became her next project. His prize-winning roses were, in her opinion, fussy and old-fashioned. She talked animatedly about putting in a minimalist rock garden, perhaps a concrete patio for entertaining. My heart ached. Each suggestion was a tiny chisel chipping away at my memories, at my sense of belonging in my own home. I tried talking to Mark, choosing my words carefully, but he was defensive. "Mom, you're being a bit sensitive, don't you think? Tiffany just wants to make the house feel like home for her too," but it wasn't her home to remake, it was mine. The generosity I had extended, offering them a place to live, was being twisted into an opportunity for a hostile takeover. I started to feel like a guest, a tolerated but not entirely welcome presence, in the very house that held my soul. The air grew thick with unspoken tensions, with Tiffany's silent assertions of dominance and my growing unease. I found myself retreating, spending more time in my own rooms, the silence of the house no longer comforting, but heavy with impending change I felt powerless to stop. I was just trying to keep the peace, you see. I was trying to be the bigger person, the accommodating mother, unaware that in Tiffany's eyes, my kindness was merely weakness, an invitation to push harder. The moment that truly crystallized Tiffany's intentions, the one that still sends a shiver down my spine, came about 3 months after they moved in. It was a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, humming an old tune Arthur used to love, preparing to bake his favorite apple pie. The scent of cinnamon and baking apples always filled the house with warmth, a tradition I clung to. Tiffany walked in, dressed in expensive-looking athletic wear, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She surveyed my baking supplies on the counter with a look of faint disdain. "Eleanor," she began, her voice deceptively sweet, "Mark and I were talking last night. This house, it's lovely, really. But it's your style, isn't it?" I paused, my hands covered in flour. "Yes, dear. Arthur and I designed it together. It holds a lot of memories." She picked up one of my mother's antique teacups, turning it over in her perfectly manicured hands. "Memories are nice, but we need to think about the future, our future. Mark and I are planning to start a family soon, and frankly," she put the teacup down with a dismissive clink, "there's only room for one woman to truly run this household, to be the lady of the house. And that's going to be me." She smiled then, a bright, predatory flash of teeth. "There's only room for one woman in this family, Eleanor." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt the blood drain from my face. My apple pie, the memories of Arthur, the very foundation of my life in this home, all seemed to crumble under the weight of her pronouncement. I looked to the doorway, hoping Mark would appear, would refute her, would stand up for me. But he was conveniently absent, probably out for a run, leaving Tiffany to deliver her edicts. What are you saying, Tiffany?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. She leaned against the counter, casual, as if discussing the weather. "I'm saying that things are going to change around here. Mark agrees. It's time for a new chapter. Perhaps you could start looking at some cozier living arrangements. There are some lovely retirement communities nearby. Less for you to worry about." Retirement communities. She was, in essence, telling me to get out of my own home. The home Arthur and I had poured our souls into. The audacity was breathtaking. My shock quickly morphed into a deep, aching hurt. This wasn't just about redecorating anymore, this was about erasure. This was about her planting her flag and claiming my life as her territory. When Mark finally came home, I confronted him, my voice trembling. "Mark," Tiffany said, "she said I should look into retirement homes. She said there's only room for one woman here." He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, don't get upset. Tiffany didn't mean it like that. We just think it might be easier for you. Less stress, you know. We could come visit all the time." He wasn't denying it. He was complicit. My own son. The boy whose scraped knees I'd kissed better, whose school plays I'd cheered at until my throat was raw, whose dreams I'd nurtured with every fiber of my being. He was siding with this interloper. That day, the baking stopped. The apple pie remained unmade. The scent of cinnamon was replaced by the cold, sterile fragrance of Tiffany's ambition. Her campaign began in earnest. My mail started being misplaced. My favorite television shows were mysteriously unrecorded. My dietary preferences, which she knew, were suddenly forgotten at mealtimes, leaving me with options I couldn't or wouldn't eat. She'd host her friends' loud, boisterous gatherings that went late into the night, without a thought for my peace. The house, my sanctuary, transformed. It no longer felt like mine. I was a shadow, drifting through rooms that echoed with a life that was no longer centered around my comfort or my memories. Every day was a fresh assault, a new reminder that, in Tiffany's eyes, and increasingly in Mark's, I was an obstacle to be removed. The fight, I realized, had truly begun, and I was woefully unprepared for the battle lines being drawn in my own kitchen. The weeks that followed Tiffany's declaration were a slow, agonizing descent into a reality I could scarcely believe was mine. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one a tiny, stinging wound inflicted by Tiffany's calculated cruelty and Mark's devastating indifference. She had a knack for making me feel small, insignificant. One afternoon, I was arranging some photographs of Arthur and me on the mantelpiece, cherished moments from our life together. Tiffany glided in, a critical frown etching itself onto her smooth forehead. "Eleanor, don't you think these are a bit morbid? All these old photos. It makes the place feel like a museum. We should put up some of our wedding pictures, something more current and cheerful." Before I could protest, she began removing them, handling them with a carelessness that made my heart clench. When I tried to explain their sentimental value, she just smiled that tight, insincere smile and said, "Of course, memories are important. But we need to live in the present, don't we?" Mark, when I appealed to him later, just sighed. "Mom, she's just trying to make it feel like her home too. Can't you try to meet her halfway?" Meet her halfway? I had already given them the entire road, and now she wanted the destination too. Food became another battleground. I have a mild gluten intolerance, something I'd managed for years. Suddenly, every meal Tiffany prepared was laden with pasta, bread, and pastries. When I'd politely decline, she'd feign distress. "Oh, Eleanor, I completely forgot. I'm so terribly sorry. There's salad." I suppose the salad was invariably limp and unappetizing. Mark would look at me with an expression that mingled annoyance and pity, as if I were the one being difficult. The message was clear: adapt or go hungry. My garden, Arthur's pride and joy, became a particular target. One morning, I woke to find several of his prize-winning rose bushes inexplicably wilted and dying. Tiffany claimed ignorance, suggesting a sudden blight. But I saw the small, almost invisible smirk playing on her lips as she watched my distress. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that she had done something to them. The vibrant colors of my garden were fading, much like my spirit. I tried, oh, how I tried, to talk to Mark, to make him see. I reminded him of all the sacrifices Arthur and I had made for him, of the love that had built this family and this home. "Mark," I pleaded one evening, my voice thick with unshed tears, "don't you remember how much this house meant to Dad? How much it means to me? This isn't just property, it's our history." He ran a hand through his hair, looking stressed and impatient. "Mom, I know you're attached to this place. But things change. People move on. Tiffany is my wife now. Her happiness is important to me. Why can't you just try to get along with her? She says you're constantly undermining her, criticizing everything she does, undermining her." I was fighting for my life, for my memories, for my dignity, and he saw it as me being difficult. The accusation stung more than any of Tiffany's direct barbs. He was so thoroughly blinded by her manipulations that he couldn't see the truth, even when it was staring him in the face. I felt myself shrinking, becoming more reclusive. I'd spend hours in my bedroom, the door closed, surrounded by the few remaining relics of my past life with Arthur. The laughter and life I'd hoped Mark and Tiffany would bring had morphed into a suffocating tension. The house felt cold, even in the height of summer. I was a ghost in my own home, my presence tolerated, but clearly not desired. One particularly bitter incident involved my mother's antique lace tablecloth, a family heirloom I used only on special occasions. Tiffany decided to host an impromptu dinner party for her new friends, and without asking, she used it. I discovered it the next morning, crumpled on the laundry room floor, stained with red wine and candle wax. When I confronted her, my voice shaking with controlled anger, she shrugged. "Oh, that old thing. It was an accident. Honestly, Eleanor, it's so fragile. You really should keep things like that locked away if they are so precious." There was no apology, no remorse. Just a cool dismissal that implied I was foolish for caring. That tablecloth, lovingly stitched by my grandmother, passed down through generations, now lay ruined, a symbol of Tiffany's utter disregard for anything that held meaning for me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of their collective disrespect pressing down on me. It wasn't just the tablecloth, or the roses, or the photographs. It was the systemic erosion of my identity, my place in my own home, my connection to my son. I felt a despair so profound it was almost physical. Was this how my story was supposed to end? As a forgotten relic in a house full of someone else's ambitions. The breaking point, the moment the last vestiges of my weary tolerance shattered, arrived cloaked in the guise of practicality and concern. It was a Tuesday, I remember, grey and drizzly, mirroring the state of my soul. Tiffany approached me while I was attempting to read in the living room, a space I rarely felt comfortable in anymore. She was holding a glossy brochure. "Eleanor," she said, her voice imbued with a false sweetness that set my teeth on edge, "Mark and I have been doing some research, and we found this absolutely wonderful place. Golden Meadows Senior Living. It has social activities, on-site medical care, everything you could possibly need." She placed the brochure in my lap. On the cover, smiling, silver-haired seniors clinked teacups, their faces beaming with artificial contentment. It looked more like a high-end prison than a home. "We've even scheduled a tour for you on Thursday," she continued, her smile unwavering. "Mark can take you. We just want what's best for you, to ensure you're comfortable and well looked after in your later years. As if I were already 1 foot in the grave. The implication was clear: my presence was a burden, my needs an inconvenience. They weren't just suggesting I move out anymore, they were actively trying to ship me off. That evening, Mark came to my room. He looked sheepish, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, Tiffany told you about Golden Meadows. It really is a nice place. We checked it out online. It's got a great rating." I looked at my son, the child I had adored, the man he had become, and a cold wave of realization washed over me. He wasn't just weak and manipulated, he was actively participating in this. He wanted me gone. The pain of that thought was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. "Mark," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "this house is in my name. Arthur and I built it. It's mine. You have no right to try and push me out." He flinched at my tone, but pressed on. "Mom, be reasonable. It's too much for you to manage. And Tiffany, well, she feels like she can't really settle in while you're still so attached to how things used to be." So, my attachment to my own life, my own memories, was the problem. Not her greed, not her disrespect, not his betrayal. Me? I was the problem. For a long moment, I just stared at him, seeing not my beloved son, but a stranger wearing his face, parroting lines fed to him by a manipulative woman. The hurt was immense, a vast, empty chasm in my chest. But then, something shifted. Deep within that chasm, a tiny spark ignited. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was anger. A cold, clear, righteous anger. The kind that burns away fog and leaves only sharp, undeniable truth. They thought I was finished. They saw an old woman, grieving her husband, bewildered by the changes in her life, an easy target. They had underestimated me. Profoundly. That night, as the rain lashed against my window, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. The despair was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was now overlaid with a steely resolve. Enough was enough. I would not be erased. I would not be discarded. Tiffany wanted a battle for who was the one woman of the family. Fine. She was about to find out she'd picked a fight with someone who had far more staying power, and far more resources, than she could ever imagine. My mind, which had felt clouded with grief and confusion for so long, began to clear. Plans started to form, hazy at first, then gaining sharpness and focus. I remembered discussions with Arthur, contingency plans we'd made, legal documents stored away safely. I remembered my own strength, a resilience forged through years of love, loss, and quiet endurance. They thought I was a fading photograph. I would show them I was the entire damn album, and the story wasn't over yet. The first thing I did, under the cloak of pre-dawn darkness the next morning, was retrieve a sturdy, locked metal box from the back of my wardrobe. Inside were all mine and Arthur's important papers, the deed to the house, clearly in my name as the sole surviving owner, bank statements, investment portfolios, and the contact details for Arthur's old friend and our trusted lawyer, a brilliant woman named Monica Albright. My hand trembled slightly as I picked up the phone, but my voice, when I spoke to Monica's answering service, was firm. The game, I realized, was on. And I intended to win. The phone call to Monica Albright was like opening a window in a stuffy, dark room. Her voice, calm and professional yet imbued with a warmth I desperately needed, was a balm to my frayed nerves. "Eleanor, it's been too long," she said. "How can I help you?" I poured out the whole sordid story, the disrespect, Tiffany's ultimatum, Mark's complicity, the Golden Meadows brochure still sitting on my nightstand like a ticking time bomb. Monica listened patiently, without interruption, only asking a clarifying question here and there. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "Eleanor," she finally said, her tone firm but compassionate, "what they are doing is unconscionable. But more importantly, from a legal standpoint, they have no leg to stand on regarding your property. Provided the deed is solely in your name, it is," I confirmed, feeling a surge of relief. Arthur made sure of that after his diagnosis. He wanted me to be secure, good man, Monica said. "All right, Eleanor. First things first, don't let them bully you into signing anything or agreeing to move. You are in your home, and you have every right to be there. We need to strategize. What is it you want to achieve?" What did I want? The question hung in the air. Revenge. No, that wasn't it. Revenge felt as bitter as Tiffany's coffee. I wanted peace. I wanted my home back. I wanted my dignity restored. And yes, a small, fiercely burning part of me wanted Tiffany to understand, unequivocally, that she had picked the wrong woman to mess with. "I want Tiffany out of my house, Monica," I said, my voice gaining strength. "And Mark. Mark needs to understand the consequences of his choices," Monica hummed thoughtfully. "That's perfectly achievable. We have several options. Given that they are living in your home without a formal lease agreement, they are essentially tenants at will, or guests whose welcome has expired. We can start with a formal notice to vacate. Over the next few weeks, Monica became my staunchest ally. We met secretly, sometimes at her office, sometimes at a quiet cafe far from my neighborhood. She meticulously reviewed all my documents, the deed to the house, my will, which, I noted with a grim satisfaction, currently named Mark as the primary beneficiary, something that would soon change, and my financial statements. I learned that Arthur, always prudent, had invested wisely. I was more than comfortable. I was financially independent, a fact I had never flaunted, but which now felt like a suit of armor. While Monica handled the legal preparations, I began to play a role. I feigned increased frailty, a growing confusion. I'd forget things, appear more withdrawn, sigh often. I let Tiffany believe her campaign of attrition was succeeding. She became more blatant in her disregard, more confident in her victory. She started talking openly about redecorating her master bedroom, my bedroom, and converting Arthur's study into a nursery. Mark, oblivious, just seemed relieved that I wasn't making a fuss anymore. Little did they know, the quiet old woman they dismissed was meticulously documenting everything. Tiffany snide remarks, her attempts to control my finances, she'd offer to pay my bills, clearly hoping to get access to my accounts, Mark's casual cruelty, it all went into a diary I kept hidden. Monica advised this might not be strictly necessary for an eviction, but could be useful if things escalated. I also started making subtle changes of my own. I re-established contact with old friends I'd let drift away in my grief and subsequent turmoil. One of them, Carol, a sharp-witted woman who'd known Arthur and me for decades, was appalled when I finally confided in her. "That little viper," she exclaimed, referring to Tiffany. "Eleanor, you let me know what you need. A character witness. Someone to help you pack her bags. I'm there." Her unwavering support was another lifeline. During this period of quiet preparation, I had to fight back waves of sadness. This wasn't just about Tiffany, it was about Mark. Each loving memory of his childhood was now tinged with the bitterness of his current betrayal. How could the boy who once drew me pictures of the best mom in the world now be so eager to usher me out of his life? Monica, sensing my internal conflict, was a rock. "Eleanor," she'd say gently, "you are not responsible for Mark's choices as an adult. You raised him, you loved him, you provided for him. He is making his own bed now. Your priority is your own well-being and peace of mind." Her words helped me compartmentalize the sorrow and focus on the task at hand. The plan Monica and I devised was simple but, we hoped, effective. It revolved around the undeniable fact that the house was mine, and I was no longer willing to share it with those who disrespected me. We prepared a formal, legally sound eviction notice, giving them 30 days to vacate the premises. Monica also helped me draft a new will, one that reflected my current circumstances and Mark's recent behavior. The bulk of my estate would now go to various charities Arthur and I had supported, and to a trust fund for Carol's granddaughter, a bright young woman studying to be a veterinarian. Mark would receive a token amount, enough to show he hadn't been forgotten, but not enough to reward his disloyalty. The hardest part was maintaining the facade, acting defeated while my inner resolve grew stronger each day. I watched Tiffany swan around my house, making plans for her future in my home, and a grim satisfaction began to bloom. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she was winning, but she was merely dancing on the edge of a cliff, oblivious to the ground crumbling beneath her perfectly pedicured feet. The weeks leading up to what I privately termed the reckoning were a strange blend of quiet activity and feigned passivity. Monica had advised me to wait for the opportune moment to serve the notice, a moment when its impact would be undeniable. In the meantime, I continued my charade of decline. I'd accidentally leave the Golden Meadows brochure in conspicuous places, sighing heavily whenever Tiffany mentioned it. She, in turn, ramped up her efforts, often speaking loudly on the phone to real estate agents about staging the house for a modern feel. Once it was less cluttered, the thinly veiled references to me and my belongings were constant. Mark remained largely absent, buried in work or placating Tiffany. On the rare occasions we spoke, his conversations were stilted, full of awkward justifications for Tiffany's behavior and gentle proddings about my future plans. It was clear he was trying to wear me down, to make the idea of leaving seem like my own. One evening, I decided to give Mark one last chance, a final, subtle test to see if there was any flicker of the son I once knew. Tiffany was out with her friends. I made Mark his favorite childhood dinner, shepherd's pie, the way he used to love it, with extra cheese on top. He seemed surprised, even a little touched. We ate in relative silence, the air thick with unspoken words. After dinner, as I was clearing the plates, I said, "Mark, your father loved this house so much. He put his heart into every corner of it. I find it hard to imagine being anywhere else." I looked at him, my eyes pleading for some understanding, some acknowledgement of our shared past. He fidgeted, then reached out and patted my hand awkwardly. "I know, Mom. But, you know, Tiffany's right. Life moves on. We need to make new memories. And maybe a new environment would be good for you." A fresh start. My heart sank. There it was. No recognition of my pain, no defense of my place in this home. Just a parroting of Tiffany's narrative. The last ember of hope that he might see reason, that he might choose his mother over his manipulative wife, died then and there. It was a painful moment, but also a clarifying one. My resolve, already firm, hardened into something unbreakable. The next day, I called Monica. "It's time," I said. We arranged for a process server, a discreet professional, to deliver the eviction notice. We decided it would be served on a Friday evening, giving them the weekend to absorb the shock. Monica also advised me to have a friend present for support when the news truly broke, so I arranged for Carol to come over that evening, under the pretext of a quiet dinner and a movie. The meticulous planning phase was over, the execution was about to begin. I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and grim anticipation. There would be an explosion, I knew. Tiffany would not go quietly. Mark would be caught in the crossfire, a situation entirely of his own making. But through it all, I felt a sense of calm. I was taking back control. I was no longer a passive victim in their drama. I was the author of this chapter, and I was writing an ending they wouldn't soon forget. On that fateful Friday, I went about my day as normally as possible, though my insides were a knot of tension. Tiffany was particularly smug. She'd received a quote from a painter for the entire downstairs, and had spent the morning discussing color palettes with Mark on the phone, loud enough for me to overhear. "Yes, darling, a complete refresh. It'll look like a different house by the time I'm done with it." I just smiled faintly and continued reading my book, or pretending to. Around 6 p.m., Carol arrived, carrying a bottle of wine and a determined glint in her eye. We settled in the kitchen, making polite small talk, waiting. At precisely 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. Tiffany, who was in the living room scrolling through her phone, called out, "Mark, can you get that? It's probably the takeaway I ordered." Mark emerged from the study, looking harried. He opened the door to a polite, nondescript man, who asked for Mr. Mark Benson and Miss Tiffany Albright. She hadn't yet taken Mark's surname, a point of some contention, I'd heard. Once identities were confirmed, the man handed them each an official-looking envelope. "You've been served," he said calmly, then turned and walked away. Mark and Tiffany stared at the envelopes, confused. "What is this?" Tiffany muttered, tearing hers open with an impatient flick of her wrist. Mark did the same. I watched from the kitchen doorway, Carol standing quietly beside me, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm. The silence in the living room stretched, taut and heavy, then shattered. The first sound was a sharp, disbelieving gasp from Tiffany. Her perfectly made-up face, usually a mask of cool composure, crumpled into an expression of utter shock. Her eyes darted from the document in her hand to Mark, then to me, standing framed in the kitchen doorway. What is this joke?" she stammered, her voice rising in pitch. "Eviction notice. 30 days. This is insane." Mark looked pale, his brow furrowed in confusion, as he read through his own copy. "Mom? What's going on? What is this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of bewilderment and dawning panic. This was it. The moment of truth. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked into the living room, Carol following a step behind me, a silent pillar of support. I met Tiffany's furious gaze with a calm I hadn't felt in months. "It's no joke, Tiffany," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's a legal notice to vacate my property. You have 30 days to find alternative accommodation." Tiffany's face flushed a dark, unbecoming red. Your property. Your property. Mark, she can't do this. This is our home." She rounded on Mark, her voice shrill. "Do something." Mark looked helplessly from her to me. "Mom, please, there must be some mistake. We can talk about this. We can work something out." "There's nothing to work out, Mark," I replied, my tone gentle but firm. "I have made my decision. For months, I have been treated with disrespect in my own home. I have been made to feel like an inconvenience, a relic to be discarded." I turned to Tiffany, my eyes unwavering. "You told me, Tiffany, that there was only room for one woman in this family, one woman to be the lady of this house. You were absolutely right. And that woman is me. This is my home. It was mine and Arthur's, and now it is mine alone." The color drained from Tiffany's face, replaced by a mottled fury. "You deceitful old woman," she shrieked, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You've been planning this. Playing the victim." "I was merely responding to the circumstances you created," I said calmly. "You underestimated me, Tiffany. You both did. You saw an old woman you could easily manipulate and push aside. You forgot that this old woman has a mind of her own, resources you never bothered to consider, and a deep love for the life and memories this house represents, memories you were so eager to obliterate." Monica had advised me to have copies of certain documents ready. I gestured to a folder Carol had discreetly placed on the coffee table. "In that folder," I continued, "you will find a copy of the deed to this house, clearly stating my sole ownership. You will also find a copy of my revised last will and testament, should you have any lingering illusions about future entitlements." Tiffany lunged for the folder, her hands trembling as she ripped it open. Mark just stood there, looking stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend what was happening. The silence was broken only by the rustle of papers and Tiffany's ragged breathing. She scanned the documents, her eyes widening in disbelief, then in a rage that seemed to consume her. "This can't be legal. Mark, call your lawyer. Call someone," she screamed, her voice cracking. "My lawyer, Monica Albright, prepared these documents," I stated. "They are perfectly legal and binding. Monica's card is also in there, should your own legal counsel wish to confer, though I doubt they will find any loopholes." Mark finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, why? After everything, how could you do this to us? To me?" The genuine pain in his voice struck a chord, but I held my ground. "Mark," I said, my voice softening slightly but losing none of its resolve, "this is not something I wanted to do. You are my son. But you stood by and watched as your wife systematically tried to dismantle my life, my peace, in my own home. You chose her over your mother, over the memories of your father, over common decency. Choices have consequences, Mark. This is a consequence of yours." Tiffany suddenly threw the papers onto the floor. "I am not leaving," she declared, her chest heaving. "This is my home now. We have rights." Carol, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Actually, dear," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, "as uninvited long-term guests with no lease, your rights are quite minimal. You're lucky Eleanor is giving you 30 days. Legally, it could have been less." The impact of Carol's words, delivered with such calm authority, seemed to momentarily stun Tiffany. She stared at Carol, then back at me, her eyes narrowed with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. The fight seemed to visibly drain out of her, replaced by a dawning, ugly realization. She had lost. Mark, however, seemed to crumble. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "I can't believe this," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "Everything, it's all falling apart." There was a part of me, the maternal part that never truly dies, that wanted to go to him, to comfort him. But I resisted. He needed to understand the gravity of his actions, the depth of the wound he had inflicted, not just on me, but on our relationship. "The only thing falling apart, Mark," I said gently, "is the illusion Tiffany created, an illusion you were all too willing to believe." Tiffany, recovering her voice, though not her composure, turned her fury back to me. "You'll regret this, Eleanor. You'll be all alone in this big, empty house. Mark will see you for the vindictive old crone you are." Her words, meant to wound, barely registered. I had faced loneliness before, after Arthur died. But this new aloneness, the prospect of reclaiming my home and my peace, felt like a liberation, not a punishment. "I'd rather be alone with my dignity, Tiffany," I replied evenly, "than live under the same roof as someone who has shown me nothing but contempt. And as for Mark, he will have to live with his own conscience." Monica had advised me on how to handle this part. "I expect you to conduct yourselves with decorum for the remaining 30 days, I stated. "Any harassment, any damage to my property, will be met with immediate legal action, and I will not hesitate to involve the police. You will make arrangements to remove your belongings. I suggest you start sooner rather than later." Tiffany looked like she wanted to spit venom, but something in my steady gaze, perhaps the undeniable finality of it all, seemed to restrain her. She grabbed her purse and her phone. "Mark, are you coming?" she snapped, her voice tight with fury. Mark looked up, his face a mask of misery and confusion. He glanced at me, then at Tiffany, then back at me. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes: regret, desperation. But it was quickly extinguished. He slowly rose and, without a word to me, followed Tiffany out of the living room. I heard their footsteps on the stairs, then the slam of their bedroom door. Carol let out a long breath. "Well," she said, turning to me with a supportive smile. "That was bracing. Are you all right, Eleanor?" I sank onto my old armchair, the one Tiffany had tried to update. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, but beneath it, a profound sense of relief. "I think so, Carol," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "I think I'm going to be more than all right." The air in the living room, which had been thick with tension for so long, already felt lighter, cleaner. The fight was far from over. 30 days was a long time to coexist with a vanquished foe, but the decisive battle had been won. Tiffany's pronouncement, "There's only room for one woman in this family," echoed in my mind. She was right. And tonight, it had been unequivocally decided who that woman was. It wasn't the younger, prettier, more ruthless one. It was the one who had built the family, built the home, and who had finally found the strength to defend it. The 30 days that followed were an exercise in strained civility and simmering resentment. Tiffany adopted an air of martyred indignation, sweeping through the house with an exaggerated tragic sigh, occasionally muttering about ungrateful elders and family betrayal, just loud enough for me to hear. Mark was a ghost, pale and withdrawn. He barely spoke to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, shame, and a helplessness that almost made me pity him. Almost. They began packing, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as the deadline loomed. Boxes appeared in the hallways, filled with the trappings of the life they had tried to build within my walls. Tiffany handled her belongings with a dramatic flair, as if each item were a precious relic being torn from its rightful place. She made a point of loudly lamenting the cramped apartment they'd been forced to rent in a less desirable part of town, a clear jab at me and my spacious home. I, on the other hand, felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. With Carol's help, and occasional check-ins from Monica, I began to reclaim my space, even before they were fully gone. Small things, at first. I moved Arthur's favorite vase back to its place of honor. I put our family photos back on the mantelpiece. I even started baking again, filling the house with the warm, comforting scent of cinnamon and apples, a deliberate act of reclaiming my traditions. One afternoon, about a week before they were due to leave, Mark found me in the garden, tending to the rose bushes. Some of them, with careful nursing, were showing signs of recovery. He stood there awkwardly for a few moments before speaking. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant, I've been doing a lot of thinking," I continued, pruning a dead branch, waiting. "I messed up," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I let her influence me. I didn't see what was happening. Or maybe I didn't want to see. I finally looked at him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. "Seeing isn't always easy, Mark," I said, my voice gentle but not absolving. "Especially when it means confronting uncomfortable truths about the people you love, or about yourself," he nodded, kicking at a loose stone. "She's different, Mom. When it's just us, she can be so charming, so fun. But then this other side comes out, this hard, grasping side. I guess I didn't want to believe it was real." "Believe it, Mark," I said. "It's very real." He looked at me then, a flicker of the old Mark in his eyes, the boy who used to confide in me. Is there any way we can fix this? Between us, I mean." The question hung in the air. I thought of the months of disrespect, the pain, the betrayal. Some things, once broken, could never be perfectly mended. "I don't know, Mark," I said honestly. "Right now, I need to heal. I need to find my peace again. Perhaps, in time, we can find a new way to be mother and son. But it won't be the way it was. And it certainly won't be with Tiffany under my roof, or in my life." He seemed to deflate, but he nodded. "I understand." He turned to leave, then paused. "The apartment, it's really small. Tiffany's not happy that, Mark," I said, returning to my roses, "is a consequence she, and you, will have to manage." The day they finally moved out was anticlimactic. A rented van pulled up, and a couple of burly movers efficiently emptied their remaining boxes. Tiffany directed them with a sullen expression, pointedly ignoring me. Mark offered a curt, almost inaudible, goodbye as he carried the last box out. And then, they were gone. The front door closed with a quiet click, and an immense silence descended upon the house. It wasn't an empty silence, though. It was a silence filled with possibility, with peace, with the comforting presence of Arthur's memory, no longer threatened. Carol came over that evening. We opened a bottle of good wine, the one she'd brought on that fateful Friday, and we toasted. To new beginnings. To resilience. To the rightful lady of the house. As I walked through my home that night, touching familiar objects, breathing in the air that was finally, truly mine again, I felt a profound sense of calm. The battle had been hard fought, the emotional cost significant. But I had reclaimed not just my house, but myself. My dignity. My strength. The weeks that followed their departure were like the slow, gentle unfolding of a flower after a long, harsh winter. My home, once a source of tension and anxiety, transformed back into my sanctuary. I took my time, rediscovering the rhythms and routines that had once brought me comfort. I filled the rooms with music Arthur and I had loved, classical pieces and old jazz standards that Tiffany would have undoubtedly deemed stuffy. I spent hours in the garden, coaxing Arthur's roses back to their former glory, planting new flowers that brought vibrant splashes of color to the once threatened landscape. The scent of freshly turned earth and blooming jasmine replaced the lingering traces of Tiffany's expensive, cloying perfumes. I redecorated, but on my own terms. I didn't need a modern refresh, I needed warmth, comfort, and memories. I had my favorite armchair reupholstered in a soft, welcoming fabric. I rearranged the furniture to create cozy reading nooks and sunny spots for my morning tea. Each change was a small act of reclaiming ownership, of imprinting my personality back onto the space that was so intrinsically mine. Friends, like Carol, rallied around me. We had leisurely lunches, went for walks, and attended local art shows. I reconnected with a book club I'd abandoned during the turmoil, and found joy in discussing literature with like-minded women. The loneliness I had feared, the loneliness Tiffany had tried to weaponize against me, never materialized. Instead, my life became richer, fuller, filled with genuine connections and pursuits that brought me quiet satisfaction. Mark called occasionally. His calls were tentative, filled with awkward small talk. He never mentioned Tiffany directly, but I could read between the lines. Their new life in the cramped apartment was clearly not the blissful existence Tiffany had envisioned. He sounded tired, stressed, and perhaps a little lost. I listened, offered polite, but non-committal responses. The deep wound he had inflicted on our relationship would take a long time to heal, if it ever truly could. I made it clear that while he was my son and I would always have a mother's concern for him, the bridge he had burned would require more than a few hesitant phone calls to rebuild. I had established boundaries, and I was determined to maintain them. One afternoon, about 6 months after they'd left, Monica called. "Eleanor," she said, "I thought you might be interested to know. I heard through the grapevine that Tiffany Albright, or rather, Tiffany Benson, as she's now insisting on being called, is looking for a new job. Apparently, her lifestyle expectations weren't being met." A small, ironic smile touched my lips. Poetic justice, perhaps. Her ambition and greed had led her to overplay her hand, and now she was facing the consequences. I felt no malice, only a distant, detached sense of vindication. My new will remained firmly in place. My estate would go to those who genuinely cared, and to causes Arthur and I believed in. Mark would receive his token amount, a reminder not of what he had lost in material terms, but of the trust and love he had squandered. My life settled into a peaceful rhythm. I found joy in simple things: the first cup of coffee in the morning, the warmth of the sun on my face as I worked in my garden, the companionship of good friends, the quiet satisfaction of a home that was truly my own. The one-woman pronouncement still echoed sometimes, but now it was a reminder of my own strength, my own resilience. Tiffany had been right, in her own selfish way. There was only room for one true matriarch, one heart of the home. And I, Eleanor Ainsworth, had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was me. I had weathered the storm, and I had emerged not bitter or broken, but stronger, wiser, and deeply at peace. The house was quiet again, but it was a good quiet, a healing quiet, filled with the gentle echoes of a life well lived and a battle well won. And as I looked around at the home Arthur and I had built, I knew he would have been proud. Proud of the roses, proud of the peace, and proud of the woman who had fiercely protected their legacy. Thank you all for listening to my story. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. Please, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Perhaps you have a similar story of standing up for yourself. Until next time, take care.